Scotland, a land shaped by its rugged landscapes and resilient people, but woven into its history is the story of another seafaring warrior civilization, the Vikings. The Vikings began raiding Scotland's shores in the late 8th century when they invaded Iona. What started as plunder soon became settlement when they realised that Scotland was rich in fertile land. Norse heritage remains etched into our language, place names, and even our DNA, and I can't think of a more exciting civilization to share a connection to. Towering over their enemies, they were giants among men, their imposing stature only adding to their fearsome reputation. Their helmets, contrary to popular myth, bore no horns, but their eyes burned with the hunger for battle. Armed with axes sharp enough to cleave shields in two, swords forged with precision, and spears that could strike an enemy down from a distance, the Vikings were a force of nature. But it was their long ships, sleek, fast, and designed to navigate both open seas and narrow rivers that made the Vikings unstoppable. These vessels would carry the Vikings from the known world, from Scandinavia to the coasts of Scotland, where they would leave their mark on our history. To truly understand how the Vikings interacted with Scotland and its people, I took a trip to the Govan Stones. These ancient carvings housed in Govan Old Parish Church reveal a story of conflict, power, and cultural exchange. Today we speak with Tom Horn, an expert on the Govan Stones and all things Viking. He'll help us unravel the secrets of these artefacts and tell us what they mean about Scotland's Viking history.
If we're talking about the Vikings, we are talking about the Clyde Britons that made some of the stones that you're seeing behind us, because this was a kingdom that was here before. The Clyde Britons were based at Dumbarton Rock, or Alclute as they called it, further up the Clydes, that way. What happens is the Vikings, as they tend to do, appear and mess things up. So they're based at Dumbarton Rock. The Vikings besiege it in the year 870. And at that stage, this kingdom has to reinvent itself. It used to be known as the Kingdom of the Alclute of Dumbarton Rock. After that point, in the historical sources, it's referred to the Kingdom of Strathclyde, so the valley, the strath of the Clyde. And their interest is more the Clyde proper and down even into Cumbria. So without the Vikings, you maybe don't get the kind of type of stone carving that we see here. And the kind of stone carving we get is some of the best stone carving in early medieval Britain and Ireland, and they're known as the Govan Stones. There are dozens of them, and they've all been discovered from the site that's around us now. If you look at Govan Stones, say on Google Maps, historic mapping of the area, you see it's got a sort of heart shape to it. And if anyone knows a site like Iona, you get these early medieval Christian sites that have these kind of almost organic shaped churchyards around them. And this is preserved in the landscape. So we've got burials dating back here to about AD 500. So this site has been used for burials, for Christian burials, for over 1500 years. And there may even be a Bronze Age ceremonial landscape beneath that as well. One of the stones that we have maybe is a recarved standing stone. So the situation we've got here from the 870s onwards, possibly slightly earlier, is these Strathclyde Britons are kind of having to reinvent themselves. It's the Clyde Britons 2.0, if you will. And they start carving these amazing stones. And we have the Govan sarcophagus behind us, which is pretty unique for pre-Norman Northern Britain. There's really nothing like this. And this is an investment of, the equivalents of millions today in a funerary monument, and we think it's a martyrium. It's a shrine for Saint Constantine, who was a Pictish king whose sister was married into the Strathclyde family. He was killed by Vikings after killing Vikings before that, and we think maybe his body was brought back and it was venerated by the Strathclyde Britons, including his sister. But these are not the only stones that you see here. We have the famous Govan hogbacks as well, and some people, including myself, think they're likely showing an influence or coming up from northern England, where these probably tombstones, these houses of the dead, are introduced into Strathclyde. So Strathclyde, I always say on my tours, is a very sort of magpie kingdom, so it'll take things from the Pictish world. So behind me here, you can see the Pictish style horse and rider scene. And it will take influences from the Viking, the Anglo-Scandinavian world, and that thing is represented by these hogback tombstones that we think are here as well. We've got 5 of them in Govan. There's also one up at Luss. There's one near Stirling as well. But we also have standing crosses. So this kingdom again is showing that it's Christian. So you'll have upright standing crosses, and that'll be ones that are actually have a cross on them, or ones that are a slab and they have crosses carved onto them. So they're showing that they're Christian, but they're also showing that they're warriors. So like here, you've got an armed warrior on a horse. We think that's maybe Constantine himself. We have other depictions where generally they're on horses, or at the very least they're armed. They've got shields, they've got swords, and they've got spears. So you can imagine this kingdom again, it's showing it's being reinvented, and it's doing that through art in a very visible way.
These artefacts bridge the past and present and give us a glimpse into Viking craftsmanship and the role that they played in Scotland's history.
Scotland's story is intertwined with the Norse. Through settlements and intermarriage, their legacy remains written in our blood. Genetic studies show Scandinavian ancestry is strongest in Shetland, with 44.5% of people sharing ancestry to the Vikings, in Orkney 31%, and the Western Isles sharing 22.5%, fading along Scotland's northwest coast with 15%. But their influence isn't just in our DNA.
I also spoke with Dr. Ragnhild Jusland, a sociolinguist and expert in Norse culture. With her background in language, history, and cultural heritage, I questioned her in hopes of answering some of the tough questions. Dr. Ragnhild, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
So my name is Ragnhild Jusland, and I'm from Norway originally. I work now for the University of the Highlands and Islands at the Orkney campus.
Okay.
And my background was in Scandinavian studies, Scandinavian language and literature. And as part of that, I studied Old Norse language and Old Norse literature and runology, as well as modern language and literature. And got more into the area of cultural studies, culture and heritage.
I'm sure you'll be able to tell us what kind of Norse influences can we still see today, particularly in language in Scotland?
Yeah, I see some influence in the language in Orkney, and perhaps even more so in Shetland. And one thing is place names, which you asked about.
Yes.
Yeah, so a majority of the place names, the farm names and the names of natural features such as hills and bays and so on are of Norse origin. And then you have the newer names such as names of streets and houses. So among the farm names and nature names, you can see, for example, that the Norse names have been kept, but the pronunciation has often been changed a little bit. So now it can be hard to understand what the Norse word was. For example, the town where I live is called Kirkwall. So Kirk is quite easy to understand, meaning church, and it's the same word in Norse and Scots actually. So it's Kirkja in Old Norse and Kirk in Scots. So that church bit is easy, but what about wall? Kirk wall, is it the wall of the church? You might wonder, but that comes from a word for bay.
Okay.
Lager. So it's Church Bay. It's
Right,
just that it's
okay.
been misunderstood and changed to Kirkwall over the years.
And are there any myths or folklore from the Norse period that still resonate today with the Scottish Island communities?
Hmm. Yeah, there are some stories that are known from medieval Icelandic manuscripts that are also told in Orkney and have
Okay.
a slightly different version. So it's the same story, but it's been made local and been passed
Okay.
on orally here. One story is about how the sea became salty.
Okay.
Uh, and the answer to that is that there are two giantesses sitting at the bottom of the sea grinding out salt on a big millstone. Um, so that story is known from Old Norse manuscript, but here in Orkney, it's got a version that's being told where the spot where they sit under the sea is just off the coast of Orkney here in the Pentland Firth. Another one I want to mention is
Yeah.
in Old Norse mythology, there's a story about the death of the god Balder.
Okay.
And here in Orkney, there's a local version that explains the origin of some local families. Um, so uh, in the local Orkney version, Balder isn't a god, he's just a great hero,
Okay.
and he's called Bali. And then some other gods go to the underworld to try to rescue him and bring him back. And in the Orkney version, it's again local people who do that, and
Okay.
they travel to the end of the world and they down into the underworld and they get Bali back. And the Orkney version has a happy ending, so they do get him back, in
That's good.
contrast to the Viking version where they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the happy ending in Orkney is that Bali came back and he's the ancestor of the Ballantyne family.
And I was wondering if you could help me on this one. How did the Viking influence differ between areas like Orkney, Shetland, and Scottish mainland?
Um, Orkney is the centre. So the earldom of Orkney
Yeah.
included Shetland as well. And then you had an earldom in Caithness on the Scottish mainland. And for much of the time, the Earls of Orkney also held the earldom in Caithness, even though it was a separate earldom, it was same earl.
Okay.
So Orkney is the centre of power, um, and the administrative centre, and it's also the centre of communication, whereas
Right. Okay.
Caithness and Shetland are peripheral in relation to Orkney, but very much part of the story nonetheless.
I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about why the Vikings first came to Scotland and what influenced them not to just raid but to settle here.
Depends on who you ask or what your specialism is, because um, in saga literature it's
Yeah.
portrayed in one way, whereas archaeologists can find different kind of evidence which might not
Okay.
always agree with the saga portrayal. Short answer, I suppose, would be that it's a bit of all of the above. So in Orkney saga, it claims that uh, people from Norway settled in Orkney because of a political situation in Norway where King Harald Fairhair was trying to become the ruler of all of Norway, and
Yeah.
that ended up pushing out some of the other chieftains. Um,
Okay.
but I think in reality is a combination of adventure and raiding and
Yeah.
also in search of new land to
Yes.
settle, and a central position for further voyages, whether that is for raiding or exploration or for trading, because it's sitting in a very central position for trading routes as well.
Yes.
Um, So when you look at Orkney, it's very green and relatively flat, and the climate is mild with mild winters. And when you look at Norway, it's very steep and mountainous, difficult to farm, and there's little farmland available. So I think looking at Orkney, if you're looking for somewhere to establish a farm, it's absolutely perfect.
Even my hometown Stirling, which is at the very heart of Scotland, has a tale to tell of Vikings. A story of how a wolf became the iconic animal of the city.
Back in the 9th century, Stirling was a contested land, first ruled by the Picts and then taken over by Northumbrian princes Osbert and Aella. One night, as the town slept, Viking raiders were said to have crept up in the town, but they weren't the only ones awake. A pack of wolves were said to begin howling, alerting the townsfolk and allowing them to fight off the Vikings until they fled off into the night.
In tribute to their unlikely saviours, the princes painted a wolf on a banner as a symbol that still watches over Stirling today.
In 1263, King Haakon IV led a Viking army to his final attempt to conquer Scotland, but the weather itself would play a key role in his defeat.
Haakon's fleet, battered by weeks of harsh seas, finally arrived at Largs. But the stormy weather gave the Scots, led by King Alexander III, a critical advantage. With rain and fog obscuring their movements, the Scots used the rough terrain to pick off the Vikings one by one, their arrows finding their marks in the chaos. The Vikings were exhausted and disorientated and couldn't coordinate their attack. The storm damaged their fleet, leaving them vulnerable.
The Battle of Largs essentially ended Viking ambition in Scotland. King Haakon and his army retreated, and just 1 year later, the Treaty of Perth was signed, officially ending the Viking era in Scotland and its Isles.
Though the Viking age in Scotland eventually came to an end, their legacy remains. They were great warriors, travellers, and masters of the sea. From artefacts to folklore, the echoes of the Vikings are still with us, reminding us of our shared history.